All right, let's dive into one of the most dramatic periods in British history. We're talking about 150 years of rebellion, revolution, and some serious royal drama. This is the story of the Tudors and the Stuarts. And trust me, it's way more than just a stuffy history lesson about kings and queens. It's really about a nation at war with itself, a battle over power, faith, and the very idea of freedom. And the whole thing kicks off with a single, really explosive question. How on earth did one king's obsession with having a son manage to ignite a 150-year revolution? I mean, we're talking about a chain of events that led to breaking with 1,000 years of religious tradition, executing a king, and totally rewriting the rules between the ruler and the people. It's wild. Okay, so let's set the scene. Our story begins with a king who, on the surface, seemed to have everything going for him. Henry VIII. He inherited a peaceful, wealthy kingdom from his dad. But there was one thing that would come to overshadow everything else: his desperate, all-consuming need for a son to carry on the Tudor name. And as you're about to see, he was willing to burn his entire kingdom down to get one.
So what do you do if you're a king and your wife isn't giving you a male heir? Well, if you're Henry VIII, you don't just, hope for the best. You try 6 times. That's right. He had 6 wives. 6. It's an easy number to remember, but it unlocks one of the most complicated and frankly brutal stories in royal history.
And just look at the sheer drama here. First up, Catherine of Aragon. She gives him a daughter, Mary, but no son, so he divorces her. Next, Anne Boleyn. She also has a daughter, Elizabeth, and then she's executed. Ouch. Then Jane Seymour finally gives him a son, Edward, but she tragically dies right after childbirth. After that, it's another divorce, another execution, and finally, one lucky wife who actually managed to survive him. The best way to remember their fates is like a really grim nursery rhyme. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. So here's the catch. Back in the 16th century, you couldn't just get a divorce. You needed the Pope to grant an annulment, basically saying the marriage never happened. And when the Pope said no way, Henry's solution was, well, it was absolutely revolutionary. He just decided to break England away from the entire Roman Catholic Church, create his own church, the Church of England, and put himself in charge. The crucial point to remember is the question this created. Who's really in charge here, the Pope or the King? That one question is going to define the next century and a half.
So after Henry dies, England gets a serious case of religious whiplash. First, his young son Edward VI takes over and pushes the country hard into Protestantism. But then he dies, and his sister Mary I, a super devout Catholic, takes the throne and drags the whole country right back to Catholicism, brutally persecuting Protestants along the way. And then, after her, Henry's other daughter, Elizabeth, becomes queen, and she's Protestant. It's just chaos, setting the stage for a whole new era. Now we come to Elizabeth I, a Protestant queen and an absolutely brilliant politician. She steps into this deeply divided mess and somehow manages to create a time of stability, patriotism, and incredible cultural flourishing that we now call Elizabeth's Golden Age. So how did she pull it off? How do you calm a country that's about to tear itself apart over religion? Well, she came up with this genius political strategy called the Middle Way. Basically, she brought back the Protestant Church of England, but she kept some of the old Catholic traditions that people were comfortable with. The deal was pretty simple. Just show up and act the part in public, and the government won't ask what you really believe in private. It was a brilliant compromise, and it worked. But don't think for a second it was all smooth sailing. Her reign was constantly under threat. The biggest one at home was her own cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary was Catholic and had a really strong claim to the English throne, which made her a huge danger. Elizabeth actually held her prisoner for almost 20 years before finally having her executed for plotting against her. And if that wasn't enough, an even bigger threat was looming from overseas, the Spanish superpower. And this is where England has its big David versus Goliath moment. In 1588, Spain sends this enormous fleet, the supposedly invincible armada, to just crush England. But against all odds, the smaller, faster English ships, led by guys like Sir Francis Drake, pull off a stunning victory. This win was huge. It secured England's future as a Protestant nation and kicked off a whole new era of English pride and power at sea. So remember the year, 1588. It's a massive turning point for England on the world stage. And all this new national confidence, this English swagger, it didn't just stay on the battlefield. It absolutely exploded in the arts, especially on the stage. This is the time that gave us William Shakespeare, a playwright who was so good at capturing all the drama and emotion of being human that he's still, the most famous writer in the English language, hands down.
But here's the thing about Elizabeth. She was the Virgin Queen, which meant she never married and had no children. So when she died, the Tudor line died with her. The crown passed to her cousin, James VI of Scotland, who then also became James I of England. This was a big deal. It united the English and Scottish crowns for the very first time. But it also marked the beginning of a new dynasty, the Stuarts. And oh boy, did they have a very different and very dangerous idea about how to be a king.
So, what was this big new idea? At the very core of how the Stuarts thought was this concept, the divine right of kings. It's the belief that a king gets his power directly from God, and therefore, he doesn't have to answer to anyone on earth, not the people and definitely not Parliament. So here's your memory teaser. Think of this as the king's ultimate because God said so argument. End of discussion. Now, James I, and especially his son, Charles I, they just didn't have Elizabeth's political smarts. Charles believed so completely in his own divine right that when Parliament started questioning him and refused to give him money, he just got rid of it. He dismissed Parliament and ruled all by himself for 11 years. He just started making up taxes without their approval. For a lot of people, this wasn't just a political disagreement anymore. This was straight-up tyranny. Yeah, that wasn't going to last. Eventually, Charles needed a ton of money to fight a rebellion up in Scotland, and the only way to get it was to call Parliament back. But when he did, he was met with a room full of furious leaders who were ready to demand their power back. The standoff between the king and Parliament was at a breaking point, and it was about to explode into all-out war.
The final straw came when the king himself stormed into the House of Commons and tried to arrest 5 of his biggest opponents. He failed, and after that, there was no going back. The country split right down the middle. On one side, you had the Cavaliers, who were loyal to the king. On the other, the Roundheads, who fought for Parliament. And just like that, the English Civil War began.
The war was brutal, and it dragged on for years. But the tide turned thanks to Parliament's secret weapon, the new model army. It was a professional fighting force led by a military genius named Oliver Cromwell. After they scored massive victories at battles like Marston Moor and Naseby, it was pretty much over. The king's army was crushed, and Charles himself was captured. And then came the moment nobody saw coming. Parliament didn't just lock their king up. They put him on trial for treason against his own people. And in 1649, they found him guilty and chopped off his head in public. This was revolutionary. The idea that a king could be executed by his own people sent shockwaves across Europe. A key memory point? A king executed by Parliament. This event changed everything. So, with the king dead, what happens next? Well, they abolished the monarchy entirely. England was declared a republic called the Commonwealth. And for most of this kingless period, it was led by the same guy who won the war, Oliver Cromwell, who took the title Lord Protector. For a whole 11 years, there was no king in Britain. But as it turns out, the republic didn't stick. After Cromwell died, the country was tired of military rule and just wanted some stability. So they actually restored the monarchy, inviting the executed king's son, Charles II, to come back and take the throne. The problem was that fundamental question, who's really in charge, the king or Parliament, still hadn't been answered. And that set the stage for one last final showdown. Now, amidst all this political drama, something incredibly important for our rights today was born, the Habeas Corpus Act. It's a Latin phrase, and it basically means you shall have the body. What it does is guarantee that no one can be thrown in prison and just left there without being brought before a judge. It made it illegal for the government to just disappear people. So here's the memory teaser. Think of habeas corpus as your golden rule of justice. It's your fundamental right to have your day in court. So the final act kicks off when the next king, James II, who is a Catholic, has a son. All the Protestant leaders in Parliament absolutely freak out at the idea of a permanent Catholic dynasty. So they do something incredible. They secretly invite a foreign ruler, the Protestant William of Orange, who happened to be married to James's daughter Mary, to invade England and take the throne. And it worked. When William's army landed, James's support just melted away, and he fled to France without even a fight. So William and Mary were crowned king and queen, but on one massive condition. They had to agree that Parliament was the supreme power in the land. Just remember it as the revolution that was so peaceful, they called it glorious. So after all that chaos, what was the result? what's the big takeaway from these 150 years? Well, for one, a constitutional monarchy where it's clear Parliament has the final say, not the king. Two, the Church of England is here to stay as the official state church. And three, the foundations for modern British democracy are now set. But it's also important to remember that all this conflict left some really deep scars, especially in Ireland and Scotland, that would cause problems for centuries.
And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. The Glorious Revolution settled the power struggle in England, for sure. But enforcing that solution onto Ireland and Scotland, what new seeds of conflict did it plant? What resentments and rebellions did it set in motion that would continue to echo for hundreds of years? But that's a story for another time. Thanks for diving into this with me today.